Welcome, everyone, to
Welcome.
our session number 27.
27. Wow. Let's do it.
Take it away, Terry.
All right. In our previous session, we finished up a long letter, the continuation, the end part of Cosmological Notes, which had to do with anthropology, how life started on the planet and how human life began on this planet, which is part of a series of 7 spheres, each on various levels of consciousness. So let's give just a little bit of a review of what we learned in that. First of all, here's a question. We asked whether or not animals meditate, and the answer was no, they had no need to. But I always thought it was interesting that HPB never talked about meditating herself, and nobody ever mentioned, oh, she's in meditation right now. Why do you think that is?
She's always in a state of near meditation.
Not always, but close enough. She had lived and communicated and worked with the Mahatmas for so many years that she was very much in communication with them, not at all times, because they sometimes withdrew to let her have her life experiences. But whenever necessary, she could summon them because she respected the fact that their time was important, and she would never bother them with something that she didn't think was of utmost importance. She, whenever she made the effort, put herself into alignment with her higher self, which her higher self is what is in tune with the Mahatmas. And that's what we have to do, the very same thing. Get into alignment with your higher self through meditation, and then that is your connection to the Mahatmas. Very important. If you're not meditating, then you're treating this as an exercise for the mind, not for the soul. We talked about how when a person dies, the physical body, when it dies, it's not just the physical body that dies, it's the personality. That personality, which existed for 50, 60, 70, 100 years, the body dies, the molecules that made up that body return to the physical earth, the prana, the life force, returns to Fohat, the equivalent life force for the universe. And the emotions, the astral body, returns to what? Akasha. Akasha. We didn't really flesh that out last time. But in reviewing, I thought, aha, there it is right there. The Akasha is the sum total of all events from the point of view of the astral plane, but with the lower mind and the higher mind together reviewing it. It's like a slideshow, a movie of everything, but it includes all reactions from everything, plants, animals, humans, whatever happens to be in there. But it's also the Dhyan Chohans, because they view they're in full consciousness during the entire process. So it includes all of that. That's why Mahatmas and any of the members of the hierarchy can review any point in history 1 billion years ago, 4 billion years ago.
To our listeners, let's let's remind them that we're talking about the Akashic records here, and some of you have probably heard of the Akashic records. Where are they? Where do they exist? Well, you can't point to them. They're, as Terry is saying, in different dimensions, in the astral and lower mental realms. It's a recording of events, of our perceptions of events, right?
Right. And when HPB was writing The Secret Doctrine, she would write to her friends and relatives and explain what was going on. And she said, it's amazing. She said, it's like I can see the actual events unfolding before my eyes, like a panorama. And I can see and feel everything that is going on in that time period and for that event.
That also is one of the siddhis that Patanjali talks about in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali in the later parts of the 3rd chapter where we learn about the abilities that unfold for us as we progress in spiritual things. And the ability to access these records, if you will be more normalized for those advanced sadhakas that are at that level. When else does it happen spontaneously, though, for everybody? It might happen, and most reports of near-death experiences say that it happens when you're approaching the period of death or the state of death, and then the after-death state as well. There's a review, and some teachers talk about that review being a discharge of physical memories, or of they're not really physical, a discharge of memories in the brain, but it also has to do with the Akashic records that is being reconciled before this life is concluded on Earth.
We're actually going to have a few letters that deal exactly with the after-death process called Bardo, a Tibetan term. And the masters are going to reveal quite a bit of information that had never been revealed before. So that will be very interesting. One of the things that they point out, as you mentioned, is that no person dies insane. They actually use that phrase, no man dies insane. What KH says is there is a moment of clarity where everything that happened during that lifetime is reviewed. And that's exactly what it is. It's kind of like the downloading process.
Or uploading, maybe.
Uploading, yeah I guess. Uploading of that person's life into the Akashic record.
The cloud.
Exactly. There you go. Into the cloud, literally. No, that's very, very good. So with our new technology, some of this stuff becomes actually more understandable. All right. We learned also that we humans are the sum total of all experience that has happened on life. Mineral, consciousness, whatever minerals learn, plant life, from the one-celled plants all the way up to magnificent oak trees and ponderosa and sequoias, the bristlecone pines that live for 10,000 years, all the way through all of the humans, not all the humans, but the animal life, from the very smallest snail, worm, amoeba, all the way up to giraffes, elephants, to horses, whatever the highest level of mammal we participated in, because we all graduated somewhere during that process, and now we're in human life. So all of that comes with us. We have all of that in our DNA, our spiritual DNA.
Let's give just one or two quick examples, because that might sound that might not be understandable. When Terry says we as humans have the experience of trees, what could that mean? Well, first of all, we'll make this very quick, but I think it's important to give a specific example of this. If we do have the lessons that we gained as trees, what would a lesson might be? It might be learning to be stable. If a tree doesn't grow its roots deep enough and wide enough, the tree won't be stable. It'll fall over. So let's talk about physical balance. Do we learn how to balance? Of course. You're like, that's not anything special. I don't care about that. Well, don't you need that though? You need that to walk around. And that's why we don't have that lesson as a big lesson in life. That's basic. We'll leave that to the lower kingdoms. Without any disrespect to trees, they're a lower kingdom because the consciousness of a tree is much more simple than ours. So that's an example of what we would be bringing with us, the ability to be stable and grounded, which is one example of millions of types of lessons that plants would learn that we bring with us.
One other thing that we're learning as we go along is that we experience the results of the choices we made in the past.
Mm-hmm. It's called karma.
And some of those choices result in suffering. The results of karma, is nature's way of bringing us back into alignment. It's that simple. When we are suffering physically, emotionally, or mentally, it's because something is out of alignment in our life. And it's our job to figure out what that something is and to get back into alignment. Nature is very patient. We pointed out before, sometimes the first reminder is just like a little flip on the head, like, wake up, come on, get back into alignment. And we ignore that. The next time it might be a ruler on the hand. Come on now, get your life in order. We ignore that, and next one might be a 2x4. And the one after that may be the house falling on your head. It sometimes results in death when we ignore nature.
And when you say out of alignment, that in and of itself is perspective as well. Being out of alignment might just really be, hey, we're supposed to be. We're experiencing suffering for a reason, which may seem out of alignment, but really the universal scales of justice are just rebalancing themselves.
More than once, the Mahatmas say there is only one law in the universe. Only one. The law of harmony. You can call it balance, harmony. It doesn't matter what it is. Anytime anything is out of alignment, out of balance, that law forces it brings it back into alignment. And we as humans have to take upon ourselves the task, the goal of putting ourselves into alignment with nature. It's that simple. Once we figure out how life works, it's like, I got it. Let's do whatever work we have to do. Eliminate the suffering in your life by putting yourself into alignment with nature, and everything else is simple after that.
The universal law that Terry is talking about is real for everybody, and this may result in some perceived discomfort or suffering. Prolonged suffering usually is a result of choices, though, and I know that may sound harsh, but if the universal scales of balance, the big pendulum that always swings, it may present a tough situation. Usually, not always, but usually, we can resolve it. If for some reason we find ourselves always having the same tough situation show up, and that would usually mean that we're not resolving it. And that also might mean, I'm using a lot of mights and maybes, but you decide for yourself. Our choices dictate how long we suffer, is the point I'm getting at here. We can prolong the suffering, or we can reduce the suffering. One way to say our whole mission in our spiritual quest is to help everyone reduce suffering. That's one way we can say it. But we have the very strong ability to choose to not reduce, to make choices that result in more suffering. Don't do that. I'm going to do like what Homer does to Bart when he grabs his neck. Don't do that. Don't cause more suffering.
Yeah.
Notice nature. See where this path of life is flowing. And the more we're flowing with that, there will be less suffering.
Yeah. Learn the lessons. It has taken us decades to figure out this. Even with diligent effort. But now we feel, at least, that we have made a significant amount of progress in understanding how life works. Everything is trying to figure it out. Scientists, religious
Philosophy.
people, a cat, a dog. You can see our pets. They're like trying to understand what we say and trying to figure out. You can almost see their brains working sometimes. But everything is. An amoeba is trying to figure out how life works. The Mahatmas are still trying to figure out how life works. They don't know everything. They're still making mistakes. But they're way ahead of us. So they are our teachers. They are our heroes, the ones that we want to follow. We learned that the highest part of our being, which is pure spirit, is indivisible. It has no particular qualities. It can't be quantified, measured by any metric, and it can't be reduced. It is all-encompassing. It is everything. And that's why when we say we are a one, that's what it is. When all of the universe goes into the great pralaya called the night of Brahma, that's only spirit is what's still existing then. And the potentiality for any manifestation is hidden in repose. We'll see a few more eloquent statements about that as we go. The first humans that showed up on Earth, first of all, were on this very pure level, the first planet A in the round. Let's show that real quickly. Planet A is just below the level of spirit coming out of our pralaya. And they are very pure. They're undefiled, as Moria said. Pure and undefiled. Everything in the universe has desire, not just humans, everything. The Mahachohans have desire. The Dhyan Chohans have desire. Everything in the universe itself has desire. But here's the difference. We as humans are almost 100% focused on me. Even when we do something good for someone else, there's usually a personal element in that. You give a gift to somebody and you make a note in your mind. I gave so-and-so this gift, so
That happens in
I'm
families a
expecting
lot.
another gift in return. So just be aware of things like that, but there's usually a personal element. You say that you love someone, and what is it Eckhart Tolle says about love?
It's usually a contract. It's
Yeah.
usually transactional.
And in Spanish, as he said, they have the word te quiero, the phrase te quiero
And we know what that translates to.
means
I want you, basically.
I want you.
Yeah.
I can't live without
Yeah.
you. It's about me. It's not about you.
But there's also te amo, which is different.
They have two different verbs, amar and querer, to want or to love. But ask yourself every time that you have an expression of love, is there any personal element? Are you expecting something in return, or is it just pure, no expectations whatsoever? Do you love people unconditionally? If you look really carefully, it may not be the case. At the end of our last session, we talked about how do you apply these things in your everyday life. Paul reminded us, stop whenever you have a situation that confronts you with adversity, some kind of event that's just about to happen. You get cut off in traffic. Somebody gets in an argument with you. Stop just for a moment and breathe. Remember who you are, which is not this person whose ego has been attacked. You are spirit. You are God, if you want to call it. You are the essence of the universe. One small aspect of it, but you are pure. You are in the center of everything. You are pure and undefiled. And if you remind yourself of that, it will calm numerous stressful situations. The other thing we pointed out, everything is exactly as it should be, regardless of how chaotic and crazy it seems to us. We made it that way. Humanity. I'm not talking about me or you personally. I'm talking about all of humanity. Everyone in physical incarnation right now, and all the ones who are in a pralaya right now waiting to come back into incarnation. We created this world that we live on. So we get to deal with the consequences. That is our school. That's our learning experience. We made it, and we get to deal with it. So, of course, it's the way it should be, because karma works that way. Life works that way. And we're trying to figure out how life works. And now we're on letter number 45. So go ahead with reading that.
All right. This is received February 1882 in Allahabad, India. And we're hearing from Moria still?
Yes.
To
At
Sinnett.
the end of his last letter, he said, "For some short time you will not hear of or from me. Prepare." But we still have another letter here.
How many days after?
No one
say.
knows.
No.
Several days.
Okay. Your letter was addressed to me as you were not aware that KH had again put himself in relations with you. Okay, so in between the last letter and this letter, Sinnett had sent a letter to...
No, remember in the previous letter, Moria said, "I can see my brother is writing a letter to you,"
Right.
but he got sidetracked
Okay.
because of duty. He had
Okay.
to attend to something else.
Okay. Nevertheless, as I am addressed, I will answer. Quote, "Do so by all means, go ahead."
Now, obviously, Sinnett had sent a letter proposing something, and it has something to do with the medium Eglinton, William Eglinton, who had been mentioned by Stanton Moses a month or so previously when he wrote to Sinnett, and his spirit guide, the Imperator, was getting exasperated because of what Sinnett had said about who this Imperator was. And he said, "I will try one more honest medium, Eglinton, and see if maybe he knows anything about these Mahatmas."
And so Moria is answering Sinnett, and Moria is saying, "Do so, by all means, go ahead." What is he saying to...
We're not sure.
We don't know what that means. Okay.
But it does pertain to Eglinton.
Okay. And then Moria continues, "The result may be disastrous to spiritualism, though the reality of the phenomena be proved hence beneficial to theosophy. It does seem cruel to allow the poor sensitive lad, Eglinton, to risk himself inside the lion's den, but since the acceptance or rejection of the kind invitation is with the medium under the counsel and inspiration of his mighty and far-seeing Ernest, why should others worry?"
So, yeah, this medium, Eglinton, is going to try some kind of an experiment. And the masters are completely aware of it ahead of time. He's probably got in mind to test them to see if they actually exist and if they're something besides some other spirit guide.
I wonder how Eglinton thinks that he's going to test the Mahatmas.
I don't know, but there's a particular event that's going to come up in a month or so, and it's quite interesting.
As we are not likely to correspond very often now, I will tell you something you should know and may derive profit from. So why is he saying as we're not likely to correspond very often?
Because he's turning over the correspondence back to KH.
Okay,
and
so
he's planning to step back and leave them to follow up.
Sure. On the 17th of November, the septenary term of trial given the society at its foundation, in which to discreetly, quote, preach us, will expire. I think we need to clarify what that means.
Okay, because the Theosophical Society was founded on November 17th, 1875 in New York City. So they're coming up in a few months. This is February, but in November, it will be 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's explaining that this was a trial, and he'll continue with that.
One or two of us had hoped that the world had so far advanced intellectually, if not intuitionally, that the occult doctrine might gain an intellectual acceptance and the impulse be given for a new cycle of occult research. This is very interesting. We talk about this a lot, but it's never been said so directly. Others, wiser as it would now seem, that's funny, okay, thought differently. And he's talking about the hierarchy, his brothers, K.H. Moria and the other, probably the Chohans and the co-workers.
Basically, it was him and K.H. and a very few others that thought this was a good idea. Apparently, the majority of the
adepts,
Mahatmas and Chohans,
did not think it was a good idea.
They're like, yeah, I don't think they're ready for this.
I'm going to read that again now that we have discussed that. One or two of us had hoped that the world had so far advanced that the occult doctrine might gain an intellectual acceptance and the impulse be given for a new cycle of occult research. Others of the masters, wiser as it would now seem, thought differently, but consent was given for the trial, and that's why the Theosophical Society was created, and all the communications are being given. It was stipulated, however, that the experiment should be made independently of our personal management, that there should be no abnormal interference by ourselves. So, casting about, we found in America the man to stand as leader, a man of great moral courage, unselfish, and having other good qualities. He was far from being the best, but as Mr. Hume says in HPB's case, he was the best one available. And they're talking about Alcott, of course.
Right. And both of them were very full of defects. Each one of them had a bunch of defects, but each one was the best available.
With him, we associated a woman of most exceptional and wonderful qualities, HPB. Combined with them, she had strong personal defects. Oh, we hadn't gotten to that yet, yeah. Combined with them, she had strong personal defects, but there was no other living person fit for this work. We sent her to America, brought them together, and the trial began. From the first, both she and he were given to clearly understand that the issue lay entirely with themselves, and both offered themselves for the trial for certain remuneration in the far distant future, or as K.H. would say, as soldiers volunteer for a forlorn hope.
So that their remuneration was that in the far distant future, they would see the results of their work. It was a sacrifice, and they knew that it was going to cause pain and suffering for them, even though it was not for personal gain, but for the benefit of humanity. The Mahatmas do the same thing. They suffer because of us. If there's any vicarious atonement, that's what it is. It's the spiritual hierarchy that takes on karma on behalf of humanity because they hold back their own progress in order to help us make progress.
For these 6.5 years, they had been struggling against such odds as would have driven off anyone who was not working with the desperation of one who stakes life and all he prizes on some desperate, supreme effort. Their success has not equaled the hopes of their original backers, phenomenal as it has been in certain directions. In a few more months, the term of probation will end. If by that time the status of the society as regards ourselves, the question of the brothers, is not definitely settled, either dropped out of the society's program or accepted on our own terms, that will be the last of the brothers of all shapes, colors, and sizes. So is he saying that they're all just going to withdraw completely if
Yeah.
the decision is made to do that?
So the experiment, in part, was not just sharing the doctrine, but revealing the existence of the Mahatmas, the lower members of the spiritual hierarchy of our planet. The world didn't really know about it. Even in India, it was more kind of a mythology, their understanding of these Mahatmas. Only the more advanced individuals who were either already chelas or hoping to become chelas and working in that direction really knew of the existence of these Mahatmas. So it was a coming out process, revealing themselves to the world, not physically, but their doctrine and their existence. And as the other members of the hierarchy expressed, they didn't think the world was ready for it, but they wanted to try the experiment anyway.
Let's also make the point again. I love sharing why Terry and I put so much stake into these guys and not the countless other guys and maybe gals that are proclaimed to be spiritual beings here to save the world, basically. When Terry says this is their coming out party, there's nothing in here about them wanting to become personally famous. Nothing. It's the opposite. They're not making themselves known. They're choosing a couple of individual people to very discreetly communicate with behind the scenes, but it's the doctrine, it's the teachings that they want to give to the world, the teachings to make the world better. So if that one distinguishing factor isn't enough to put more belief, if you will, you can say belief or even faith, I don't like using that word too much, but in these guys versus countless other teachers, gosh, I don't know what is. That one thing alone, they don't want anyone to know who they are.
And that's the key. As we point out so many times, if you have a teacher that shows a certain degree of ego, more than likely, that's not the greatest teacher that you can find. You might want to look around a little more.
Also, another quick thing, I just get excited about this. Usually, if any teacher or message talks at all about who you were in a past life, that's a red flag too.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, let's move along.
It was kind of a warning that if the world wasn't ready to accept the existence of these individuals and or their teachings, then it was time to fade into the background again, which is to resume the status quo, how they operated before that. They never stopped working ever, but they normally work behind the scenes and without any knowledge of what's going on in their lives before the public.
We will fade from public view like a vapor into the ocean. Only those who have proved faithful to themselves and to truth through everything will be allowed further intercourse with us. Oh, so they would keep communications, he's saying.
Well, they always have, but only with a few individuals. And those few individuals have to find them on their own. And it's because they are inspired. They do the same thing today. They inspire people. They plant the thought form next to them to read a certain book or to visit a certain location.
But they did have individual chelas prior to
course.
the society.
Always they have had.
Do we think they might still have individual? Probably not, though, at this point.
Individual what?
Chelas, students.
Of course they do.
That they directly communicate with.
Absolutely, they do. That has always been the case.
Even
And
today.
they will point out in one of their letters, too, this experiment of communicating with the members of the Theosophical Society was not the only one that was going on. They had other groups that they were working with, but they never revealed who or where those groups were.
Other groups on Earth at this same time
Yes.
they were in communication with, huh?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
We'll
Wow.
find it in one of the letters as we go along.
Do you think those other groups have created like yoga lineages, maybe some of the different
Not
lineages?
necessarily. They're more likely a few individuals here and there. That it's more likely on the same lines of what their normal operation is, and has been for thousands of years.
And not even they, meaning the students that they will keep talking to, unless from the president downward they bind themselves by the most solemn pledges of honor to keep an inviolable silence thenceforth about us, the lodge, and Tibetan affairs, not even answering questions of their nearest friends, though silence might seem likely to give the appearance of humbug to all that has transpired. In such a case, effort would be suspended until the beginning of another septenary cycle, which is a 7-year cycle, when, if circumstances should be more auspicious, another attempt might be made in the same or in another direction.
So they make special efforts, is what he's saying, from time to time. And there can be decades in between. But the trial period starting in 1875 was one of those special efforts that they made. And then they knew that it would have mixed results. They had no pretensions of believing that the world was going to be immediately converted to the ancient wisdom teachings. They know better than that. But they're always hopeful that it will gain more traction than their lowest expectations.
My own humble impression is that Hume Sahib's present pamphlet, highly intellectual as it is, might be improved so as to help enormously in giving the needed turn to the society affairs. And if he would trust more to his personal intuitions, which, when he needs them, are strong, and less to the voice of one who neither represents entirely public opinion nor would he believe though he were to have 1,000 proofs, the pamphlet would be converted into one of the most powerful works that this modern movement has brought forth.
Okay, so Hume, behind the scenes, has actually been doing some helpful, useful work for the society. Remember, a couple of months ago, he kind of got on his high horse and was annoyed because the Mahatmas weren't capitulating to his demands of revealing the secrets to how to perform phenomena. And he basically gave an ultimatum. Well, if you're not going to share anything, then I'm just going to withdraw. And if you've got anything you want to share, you can let me know. And Moria said, well, guess what? We can be more patient than he is, and we have no intention of sharing anything with him that he's looking for. So what was this pamphlet he was talking about? Remember that Hume had been writing a few articles for the Theosophist magazine, but then he kind of faded out on that too, and I believe Sinnett had to take up, although I'm not sure. Hume may have got himself together and started writing those again. But there was a person who had written to him or to the Theosophist expressing doubt about the Mahatmas. And he actually went to bat for them. He wrote a very long, very well thought out letter proving to them or laying out all of his proofs as to why they did exist. Like I said before, he is a dichotomy. Sometimes he is so petulant and so childish, and other times he really does something useful for the Mahatmas, and this is one of those times. The letters were published. This is hard to see because it's on a dark. This was published in a book called Hints on Esoteric Theosophy. So the first one he's talking about here, the letter and Hume's response, which was numerous pages. And then there was a second one that followed that. So those two were reprinted later as a book, which is about 130 pages. And it's very interesting. I'm sure you can find a PDF online of this. Anyway, the point is that he was doing some good work for the masters, even though he was being kind of egotistical about it.
There's one more line in the letter. It says, "Your cosmological questions will be attended to when I am not harassed with weightier business. Health
Yeah,
and prosperity, Moria."
So from now on, they have exposed the general outline of everything in their first set of cosmological notes on cosmology and their second set of notes, which was only addressed to Sinnett, that covered anthropology, the advent of humanity on Earth.
So we can assume there were more questions that Sinnett replied with,
Oh, yes.
and now he's saying your questions will be attended to later.
So Sinnett is kind of fired up at this point. He's like coming up with all kinds of questions. He is really liking the exposition of doctrine ideas that he has received so far. And he's wanting to solidify that knowledge. So he does keep asking questions. And this is kind of the cool part, interspersed with other personal letters and personal information. Here and there, he will bring in a new teaching about a specific part of this outline that has been given so far. And this is where the real understanding comes in. And that part is really understandable. As we've said before, just get a general idea of the first two sets of cosmological notes, general comprehension of how life works, and then this new information will help that. And it's also easier as a standalone teaching. For example, the information about what happens after death, the Bardo period, that is very understandable. But this, we mentioned sometimes that it's easy to get bogged down in these teachings, and yet this is the equivalent of scientific research. What science is trying to do is teach us how life works, except they're restricted to the physical world and to the Darwinian concept that it evolves haphazardly. It is the survival of the fittest. People are born into different bodies simply by happenstance. They don't know anything about karma. They don't know anything about reincarnation. They don't know anything about Dian Chohans, about these agents that work hand in hand with nature to bring along evolution. They discount all of that. So what the Mahatmas here are trying to do is to claim their spot in the world of what they would consider the religion of nature. Most of the exoteric religions in the world are man-made creations with a purpose. How can I gain more power and more money? And they work amazingly well for that purpose, but it doesn't help people figure out how life works. What he's teaching us is exactly that, the religion of how life works. All right. So now we're on letter number 46. Oh, he signed his letter, Health and Prosperity, M. All right. So letter number 46. You want to take a break?
Yeah. We're back on.
All right.
Am I on? Am I just starting?
Yes, go
Okay.
ahead.
Letter number 46. Received February 1882, so same month. Your hypothesis is far nearer the truth than Mr. Hume's. So I guess this is in response to his cosmological questions?
Something about it.
Okay.
So obviously, Sinnett has been sharing the responses from Moria with Hume, and apparently Hume got over his being miffed at Moria and started participating again. So now he's kind of addressing both of them now.
Two factors must be kept in view. A fixed period, and B, a fixed rate of development nicely adjusted to it. So I guess we're talking about something regarding manifestation or
Right.
involution, spirit into matter.
Right, and maybe
Okay.
we'll figure that out.
Okay. Almost unthinkably long, as is a Mahayuga, and we've mentioned that term before to our listeners, the grand cycle of manifestation. Would Mahayuga be the same as a Manvantara?
Yes.
Okay. It is still a definite term, and within it must be accomplished the whole order of development, or to state it in occult phraseology, the descent of spirit into matter, so we were right, the involution, and its return to the reemergence. Wow. That's it. Descent of spirit into matter, or rather manifestation itself, and then its dissolution back to spirit.
So let me just reiterate here the chronology and the length of a Mahayuga. He points out elsewhere that the periods that they use are the ones that are presented in Hinduism, but he also hints that they may or may not be accurate. So that's all we've got to go on, but at least it gives us an idea. So a Mahayuga lasts for 4.3 million years, and that's one round of all of the worlds. The period of a Manu, which is called a Manvantara.
That doesn't seem right, because the planet itself is way older than that, the physical planet.
Yes, and but the 19 of those periods make up a day of Brahma, which
19 of those make up a day of Brahma. Now that's, okay,
Yes.
that seems to make
which
sense.
is
Yes.
4.3 billion years.
And that's one day of Brahma. Okay.
And this correlates pretty
Yes.
closely to what science says is the length existence of the universe.
But a day is just a day for Brahma, not
Right.
even, right, yeah.
So 4.3 billion years, and then there's also a night of Brahma.
Like a pralaya.
which is approximately the same. So yeah, there's a huge period of manifestation. There's a huge period of rest, but in between there are numerous smaller cycles of little periods of manifestation.
Mini yugas.
Yes, exactly. So right now,
Some of those periods are civilizations that rise and fall.
right, exactly. And right now we're in the Kali Yuga, which lasts for about 400,000 years.
And make no mistake, though, that the Kali Yuga represents the bottom, like the deepest, most materialistic, most challenging, most dense period of a given cycle.
Right. So this just gives us a very broad outline
Yeah.
of what the overall pattern looks like.
A chain of worlds is an illustration already made familiar to you. You have already pondered over the life impulse beginning with each Manvantara to evolve the first of these worlds, to perfect it, to people it successively with all the shadowy forms of life. wonder why he says shadowy.
Well, he used the word aerial,
Yeah.
but it means vague, nebulous.
Oh, okay. Okay. And after completing 7 cycles on this first world, or revolutions of development in each kingdom, as you know, and we've discussed that in some of the other letters, passing forward down the arc to similarly evolve the next world in the chain, perfect it and abandon it, then on to the next and next and next, until the 7-fold round of world evolutions along the chain is run through and the Mahayuga comes to its end. Then chaos again, the pralaya. He might not be using the word chaos in the same way that we use it today.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of wish they would use a different term, but pralaya doesn't mean this, what we think of as chaos.
It might just mean lack of purpose. Because it's not really a rest. I mean, it is a rest, but it's kind of like nothing. Potential.
It's non-existence,
Right.
really.
It's dissolution. Right.
It's like,
It's hard to say anything about it.
Yeah.
Non-existence. Right. It's like
no
netty
words that you can use to describe it.
Not this, not that.
Even say, yeah, exactly. Not this, not that is the best way to say it. But chaos is probably not the best choice of words.
As this life impulse at the 7th and last round from planet to planet moves on, it leaves behind it dying and, very soon, dead planets, in quotes. The last 7th round man, having passed on to a subsequent world, the preceding one with all its mineral, vegetable, and animal life, except man, begins to gradually die out when, with the exit of the last microscopic organism, it is extinguished, or as HPB says, snuffed out, a minor or partial pralaya. Now, this is basically the moon, Mars, what else? These are dead
different
planets.
throughout the universe, not just our own solar system, but particularly in our own. We have planets that have been living planets at one point, millions of years ago, but now are dead planets because the life force and the focus of the Dian Chohans has been removed and refocused somewhere else.
I like how he's making the correlation between the planet itself being alive and the life forms on the planet being alive, and when they both live and die together.
Right.
The planet itself no longer lives when the life forms die.
Yeah.
Or move on.
It's very interesting, and he'll add a little more information
This
here.
is very cool. When the spirit man reaches the last world of the chain and passes into final nirvana, which of course is never final because there's always another cycle afterwards.
Right, exactly.
And we're using the word nirvana as kind of a heaven world, but more final than the regular heaven we go into when we die. This last world also disappears or passes into subjectivity. Interesting way to say it, subjectivity. Thus, there are, among the stellar galaxies, births and deaths of worlds forever following each other in the orderly procession of natural law. This is amazing stuff. I want to talk to Neil deGrasse Tyson about this and say, look, these guys knew about this stuff way longer than you and Carl Sagan and anyone else. These guys knew about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they came up with stuff that science is only now
exactly.
starting to even consider.
If you read the book Cosmos or watch the original Cosmos by Carl Sagan or the new Cosmos by Neil deGrasse Tyson, they talk about this stuff.
Yeah. They're actually moving closer
Yes.
to the teachings of the Mahatma.
I know. When the last cycle of man bearing has been completed by that last fruitful earth, and humanity has reached as a group the stage of Buddhahood, and passed out of the objective existence into the mystery of nirvana, then strikes the hour. The seen becomes the unseen, and the concrete resumes its pre-cyclic state of atomic distribution. There's a lot in that little statement there.
Yes.
When humanity as a group reaches the state of Buddhahood, look, every human is going to be at the level of the Buddha. We've known that. If theosophy makes sense, that makes sense. That makes sense. We're all going to be at the level of dare I say, God, if you believe that Buddha is a God. But that type of consciousness, we're all going there. We're all evolving.
Now, there is one caveat, and he will bring it up, but I'll give you a preview of it. We don't all make it in this cycle. We all will make it, but there comes a time where everything starts to shut down. And those who haven't passed a particular point in their own evolution, they don't get discarded, but their opportunity will come in the following
Cycle.
cycle.
And that's no different at all. Keep in mind the idea of small cycles and like day cycles, week cycles, year cycle. That's not at all different than when you make a certain amount of progress in your life that you in your body, and then your body dies, which everybody will. And then next incarnation, you make more progress. Just like I'm not going to reach enlightenment in this life. In the future, I will. In the future, you will. Same exact thing. This final nirvana won't be reached by everybody in this cycle of this chains and rounds. Same exact concept, just scaled up, huge.
And as you point out, nothing is ever final.
Right.
We say final, we say eternity, and yet.
Eternity isn't forever either. It's a finite.
Yeah.
But the dead worlds left behind by the on-sweeping impulse do not remain dead. Motion is the eternal order of things. And affinity or attraction is its assistant in all works. The thrill of life will again reunite the atoms. Oh, that's interesting. The thrill of life. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pause for 1 second. There was one discussion where HPB was asked sometime somewhere, why does the unmanifest become manifest? And I remember something about her saying that's the one question we don't really have an answer. Like, why? But we know there's will, but there's also the thrill of life.
Right.
Life wants to live.
Exactly. No, it's just who we are.
Yeah.
Nature doesn't want to disappear and.
Right. There is an innate impulse to live.
Exactly.
And same thing at the level of the universe itself. It wants to exist. Yeah. So he says the thrill of life will again reunite the atoms, and it will stir again in the inert planet when the time comes. Though all its forces have remained dormant and are now asleep, yet little by little it will, when the hour strikes again, prepare for a new cycle of man-bearing maternity and give birth to something still higher as moral and physical types than during the preceding Manvantara. And yes, exactly what we just said about life incarnation, same exact thing, just scaled up to the gigantic scale of the Manvantara itself.
So even if we reach nirvana in this cycle, that's not the end. We are participating in the next great cycle of Brahma.
And evolve more.
And evolve even more. So each one evolves higher forms, higher consciousness. It never stops.
This actually, I mean, it's not today practical, but if you think about what kinds of abilities would be developed at those highest stages, like think about creating a planet. Think about creating a society. I mean, these are almost like godlike powers that, and at these very, very, very high stages, I mean, if we're going to keep going beyond the level of the Buddha, it's incredible to think about.
No, it's logical to me.
Why wouldn't it be? If an amoeba has certain abilities, what would a super person, what would an adept have? What would a Buddha be able to do? The Bible says God created heaven and earth in 7 days. I mean, that type of power, I don't know, why wouldn't, if you keep getting more able, century after century, after Manvantara after Manvantara, where's the limit? There really is.
And apparently there is no limit.
I know. Wow. Okay, let's read that sentence again. Little by little, when the hour strikes again, prepare for a new cycle of man-bearing maternity, give birth to something still higher as moral and physical types than during the preceding Manvantara, and with its, quote, cosmic atoms already in a differentiated state. Because planetary development is as progressive as human evolution, it's like a corollary, I guess, planetary evolution and human evolution, the hour of the pralaya's coming catches the series of worlds at successive stages of evolution. For example, each group has attained to one of the periods of evolutionary progress, and each one stays there until the outward impulse of the next Manvantara sets it going from that very point, like a stopped clock rewound. Yeah, like you're progressing to a certain point, and then as Terry said, we might not have made it all the way. We kind of pause, we go into like a suspended animation, pralaya, and then a new for a period of time, then a new impulse, a new life impulse appears and pushes manifestation forward again from that point forward again.
Right. And most likely, we don't know all the details. You don't have to go back and go through all of the stages that it took to get up to that point. When that next form of a manifestation reaches a certain point, that's when you come in again.
There will probably be a short period of recapitulation,
Right,
just
there
like
has to be.
Short though, not learning again, just remembering.
Right.
Like in the morning, sometimes you have to go, oh, where am I? I hope I'm in my bed in my house, not some random. It takes a second to recapitulate, but you don't need to relearn what you did yesterday usually.
Yeah.
Therefore, I have used the word differentiated. At the coming of the pralaya, no human, animal, or even vegetable entity will be alive to see it. But there will be the earth or globes with their mineral kingdoms. And all these planets will be physically disintegrated in the pralaya, yet not destroyed.
So I'm not quite sure. He says disintegrated, but
the
not
atoms,
destroyed.
right? Because the atoms are still there. You can't destroy anything,
Right.
And then he says up above that the atoms come back together. Maybe he said something like that, right? Cosmic atoms already in a differentiated state. Maybe, yeah, disintegrated, but they're still there, like dust, and then it'll be magnetized back together somehow.
And it's possible, too, that during the pralaya, there are still energy fields in various places which would mark where there were planets and solar systems previously. And more than likely, those foci will attract those atoms and start the next
There you go.
phase of expression.
The planets will be physically disintegrated, but not destroyed, for they have their places in the sequence of evolution and their, quote, desires, as we heard earlier. Coming again out of the subjective, they will find the exact point from which they have to move on around the chain of manifested forms.
So they have their own form of desires.
The planets are alive.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a consciousness there. That's fascinating. This, as we know, is repeated endlessly throughout eternity in all caps. Each man of us has gone this ceaseless round and will repeat it forever and ever.
So it sounds kind of like a video game that, with the difference that it never ceases to get higher and higher in its evolution.
But this, he is saying it gets higher and higher, no?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't ever repeat anything as far as at a lower level.
Right.
It's always upward, moving upward.
The deviation of each one's course and his rate of progress from nirvana to nirvana is governed by causes which he himself creates out of the requirements in which he finds himself entangled. This is exactly like one life to the next, just scaled up. That's why it makes sense. I've never heard in any teaching ever discussions of like one manvantara to the next, one nirvana to the next. This is amazing that we're getting this teaching. Yeah. This is nowhere else that I've ever seen.
Right. And
wow.
With a little bit of rewording and getting rid of excess material is far more understandable than the secret doctrine, for example. So I think even though in the secret doctrine some of these changed slightly, I think we're getting the knowledge as it was expressed in 1882, and even if it changed a little bit, we're going to stick with this because this is something we can sink our teeth in.
And even this has been titrated quite a bit. How much did you curate down for this letter here?
This letter here, less, because
Okay.
it was pretty concise.
Oh, it was,
So
okay.
maybe only 25, 30%.
Oh, wow. Okay. But I'm sure it's helping.
Titrated. I like that word.
Does it apply? Is that?
I think so.
It might not. I might
It's a
have.
chemistry lab term.
I might have misused it, but I thought it. Might.
I'll look it up. You know that.
Okay. The deviation, from nirvana to nirvana is governed by. Okay, yeah. So we're about a third of the way through the letter so far. This picture of an eternity of action may appall the mind that has been accustomed to looking forward to an existence of ceaseless repose, but their concept is not supported by the analogies of nature, nor by the teachings of Western science. We know that periods of action and rest follow each other in everything in nature, from the macrocosm with its solar systems down to man and its parent Earth, which has its seasons of activity followed by those of sleep, and that all nature has her time for recuperation, and the same with the spiritual individuality, the monad, which starts on its downward and upward cyclic rotation. The periods which intervene between each great Manvantarian round are proportionately long to reward for the thousands of existences passed on various globes, while the time given between each race birth, or rings as you call them, is sufficiently long to compensate for any life of strife and misery during that lapse of time passed in conscious bliss after the rebirth of the ego.
All right. Now we have. Go ahead.
Volumes of teachings can be written on just that alone.
Yeah. Obviously, Sennett, and maybe Hume too, has been asking questions about particular races or groups of people. And he's going to explain a little more about that. Now, we kind of need to insert a word of warning. There were a lot of teachings that were produced and published in the early 1900s about this very thing, and many of them have significant flaws. So I would suggest that you stick to the teachings of HPB and or these two Mahatmas for that. Anything published that first came about in the 1910s and 20s is probably best left alone. That's all I'll say about that.
Thank you for that. Should we talk about that last paragraph?
Yes,
Okay. There's a lot. There's a lot to say there. So first, he understands that we may be like mind blown when hearing about this because current science at the time doesn't talk about any type of reincarnation of planets and rounds like this. We know periods of action and rest follow each other. We've discussed that many times. That's great. The monad, we can call the monad just the spark of individuality that is at the highest point of any individual person closest to spirit, right?
Yeah.
So that spark descends or manifests into the various different forms.
Mm-hmm.
The periods, so we have thousands. Where did he say thousands? Let's see.
Thousands of existences passed on various globes.
Thousand, and it's more than that when you consider the different kingdoms, but thousands of existences as humans on different globes.
No, probably hundreds. But when he says thousands, he's talking about all animals.
Okay.
And it's more than thousands, I'm sure. And some of those existences are for very long periods of time, like a tree that could live for 5,000 years.
When he says the periods which intervene between each great Manvantarian round of planets or worlds rather are proportionally long to reward for the thousands of existences. So that the reward is the resting period or
Right.
the recuperation. Yes, okay, that's what we mean by that.
The kind of absorbing all of
Yes.
that experience.
Which does happen in Bardo as well between each regular human life.
And there are periods of semi-consciousness and periods of complete unconsciousness in each one of these pralayas.
And then he also says, while the time given between each race birth, or rings, as you call them, is sufficiently long to compensate for any life or strife and misery. Because,
He will point out in another letter that nature does make mistakes. Most of what we experience is because of karma, but there are instances where nature doesn't, there are accidents, let's say. It's not anything that you did to cause something to happen, but maybe there's just a defect. You may be born with a physical handicap that has nothing to do with karma. And most of them probably are karma. But he says nature always compensates for that.
I guess we'll continue. Moving on. To conceive of an eternity of bliss or woe, and to offset it to any conceivable deeds of merit or demerit of a being who may have lived a century or even a millennium in the flesh, can only be proposed by one who has never yet grasped the awful reality of the word eternity, nor pondered upon the law of perfect justice and equilibrium which pervades nature.
Now, this is interesting because we've talked
that's a dig.
about this before. Yes, it is.
It's a dig at religion, isn't it?
Yes. We've talked about this before, this whole idea of that you're going to live in this kumbaya, Shangri-La existence where everything is perfect. And how long would you be excited about that? There is no excitement. It's like, oh gosh, it was the same thing at the buffet today, and
More cherubs playing violins again? No.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, you don't have to think very hard to figure out that that would be a hell of a way to pass eternity.
Further instructions may be given you, which will show how nicely justice is done, not to man only, but also his subordinates, and throw some light, I hope, upon the vexed question of good and evil. Wow. And now, to crown this effort of mine of writing, I may as well pay an old debt and answer an old question of yours concerning earth incarnations. Ooh, I'm excited. Let's hear it. Kudhumi answers some of your queries. At least he began writing yesterday, but was interrupted by duty, but I may help him anyhow. So we're assuming KH has not sent the letter.
Right.
Okay. I trust you will not find much difficulty, not as much as hitherto, in making out my letter. I have become a very plain writer since he reproached me with making you waste your valuable time over my scrawlings. Did KH tell Moria to
Apparently,
okay.
he says, your handwriting is so bad. He said, you need to make a better effort.
Oh, he meant just specifically the
Yes.
handwriting itself,
Oh,
not
yes.
how
No,
much he
no,
talks.
the
Okay.
handwriting.
Ah, okay. His rebuke struck home, and as you see, I have mended my evil ways. That's funny.
I looked at the original letters, and he did make more of an effort to make them legible.
That's funny. Let us see what your science has to tell us about ethnography and other matters.
Ethnography, meaning
Ethnicity, like the study of...
different groups of people, yeah. Now, here he's going to tell the latest teachings or discoveries of science in 1882. And remember, modern science in 1882 was only about 350 years old. That was the extent of modern science. Before that, everything was the realm of philosophy and religion.
The latest conclusions to which your wise men of the West seem to have arrived, briefly stated, are the following. The theories even approximately correct, I venture to underline with blue. Oh, that's the theories even approximately correct, I venture to underline with blue.
All right, so he's going to say what scientists have supposedly discovered and assume, and the ones that are even approximately correct, he's going to underline. And most of this I cut out because most of it is not understood well by science. So there's only a couple of places where he underlined and said, yeah, here's one place where they did get it right. And he'll say they got it approximately correct, but not entirely.
I'll make a break here. Number one, the earliest traces of man they can find disappear beyond the period of which the rock fossils furnish the only clue they possess. Do we know which? We don't have the blue underlines here, but we don't know which ones were underlined in blue, do we?
Oh, yeah, they will be underlined in the text here.
Oh,
There's
okay.
only a couple of them.
Okay, so that was not underlined. Okay. Number two, starting thence, they find 4 races of men who have successively inhabited Europe. A, the race of the river drift.
Now, the archaeologists in England at the time were different sites that they were investigating, and they were the remnants of civilizations that rivers had washed downstream. So they found the stones or implements or tools or whatever in a different location from where they actually lived.
B, the so-called cavemen, a race developed during the glacial period, now underlined in blue, the Eskimo being now, they say, its only type, and which possessed finer weapons and tools of chipped stone. C, the third race, the men of the Neolithic age, are found already grinding their stone implements, building houses and boats and making pottery. In short, the lake dwellers of Switzerland. And finally, D, the fourth race, coming from Central Asia. These are the fair-complexioned Aryans who intermarry with the remnant of the dark Iberians, now represented by the swarthy Basques of Spain. This is the race which they consider to be the progenitors of your modern peoples of Europe.
Now, when he talks about the lake dwellers of Switzerland, this is a pretty well-known phenomenon in archaeology. There was quite a large group of people in settlements in Switzerland, and this dates from approximately 5,000 years ago to 500 years ago. So it's very well studied and very well documented.
Number 3. They claim that the men of the river drift preceded the glacial period known in geology the Pleistocene and originated some 240,000 years ago, while human beings inhabited, this is underlined, Europe at least 100,000 years earlier. Then the underlining ends there. They come near enough, yet miss the mark in every case. There were not 4, but 5 races, and we are that 5th, with remnants of the 4th. A more perfect evolution or race with each Mahacyclic round. While the first race did not appear on Earth 500,000 years ago, Fiske's theory, but several million years ago.
So he's way off, is what he's saying.
Yeah. And maybe you're wondering, well, why don't we have any evidence of that?
Yes, and remember that in the early stages of the Earth, it was more amorphous. So,
It wasn't even physical.
and as we've said before, the remnants may be buried deep within the Earth that we've not uncovered yet, and they may have simply disappeared because they weren't densely physical like we are today.
The latest scientific theory is that of the German and American professors who say through Fiske, quote, "We see man living on the earth for perhaps 500,000 years and, to all intents and purposes, non-speak. He is both right and wrong. Right about the race having been non-speaking, because long ages of silence were required for the evolution and mutual comprehension of speech. From the moans and mutterings of the first remove of man above the highest anthropoid, a race now extinct, since, quote, nature shuts the door behind her, end quote, as she advances up to the first monosyllable uttering man. But he is wrong in saying all the rest."
So this is very interesting. It sounds like it wasn't all that long ago that humans developed coherent speech, more than just a grunt here and there.
Yeah. By the by, you ought to come to some agreement as to the terms used when discussing cyclic evolutions. Our terms are untranslatable, and without a good knowledge of our complete system, which cannot be given except to regular initiates, would suggest nothing definite to your perceptions, but would only be a source of confusion. You must have patience with Subba Rao. Give him time. So this is the first time we've heard of Subba Rao?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll
I'll finish.
go ahead and finish that, and then we'll talk about Subba Rao.
He is now at his tapas and will not be disturbed. I know what that means. If anyone studied the Yoga Sutras with me, tapas, it means your disciplined practice. You're building the strength of will and continuing to do work on your practice.
And their chelas are very strict about their tapas.
Yes, I can imagine. I will tell him not to neglect you, but he is very jealous and regards teaching an Englishman as a sacrilege. Yours, M. And then P.S. My writing is good, but the paper is rather thin for penmanship. Cannot write English with a brush, though. Would be worse. That's funny.
All right, here's a picture of Subba Rao and another chela who was known as Babaji and HPB. So Subba Rao, we will hear more about. He was one of the interesting chelas because he didn't know much about his own religion, Hinduism, even though he was a Brahmin, until he met HPB. And all of a sudden, knowledge from previous lifetimes came flooding back to him. And he became quite a scholar and quite an expert in Advaita, in the Vedanta philosophy. And he, as Maria said, was very jealous of this knowledge and information. He thought that it was a sacrilege to share it with Europeans. So he was very reluctant, but he did finally agree that he would help them try to understand this better. But he reneged on his promise, and he also was supposed to help HPB with the secret doctrine, but he also failed in that matter. He unfortunately died a very terrible death not too many years later.
Did?
Yes, he was the one that we mentioned in a previous episode where he was trying to learn how to produce phenomena, and somehow something went wrong with the elementals that he was trying to control, and he ended up with a horrible physical problem that made boils break out on his entire skin, and he ended up dying from it despite the efforts of Alcott to try to help him. But I'm assuming the Mahatmas didn't step in and do anything because it was his karma.
Wow.
We'll find more and more chelas that fail as we go along. And those failures are important too, because we can learn from their failures, try to figure out why they failed, and make sure we don't fall into the same traps that they did. All right, that's a lot of information for one day.
Yeah.
But look how enlightened we are now. You look much lighter already.
We have more lights that literally, we've got 2 extra lights here.
We
That's
we are literally more enlightened today. Thanks for joining us in our journey, and we'll see you next time.